everyone, is the launch of a new book, The Golden Dakini by Charu Singh. Charu Singh will launch the book in conversation with Andrew Quintman, and please join me in welcoming them both to the stage.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for showing up after a long, hard day of literary feasting. Hopefully you're not too full or too tired, but in case you are, we'll give you a dose of magic and mystery that will hopefully wake everyone up. So my name is Andrew Quintman. I'm an associate professor of religious studies at Yale University, and I teach and write about the Buddhist traditions of Tibet and the wider Himalayas. So it really is a great honor and a great pleasure to introduce the journalist and author, Ms. Charu Singh, to launch her new book, The Golden Dakini. Now this is the second in a series. It follows the first book, The Path of the Swan, which is the second in the series of the Maitreya Chronicles, and both were published by Hachette India. Charu Singh grew up in Chandigarh. She graduated from Punjab University, and she has worked as a freelance journalist and researcher for UNICEF and for the Asian Age, for the Tribune and Frontline. And she also spent several years living in Sikkim, now living in Guwahati. So Charu Singh's first book, The Path of the Swan, follows the wonderful story of a senior Tibetan master, Lama Ozer, and his young attendant, Tashi, as they travel from their monastery in Sikkim, led on a secret mission to the fabled Buddhist land of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom described in the 11th century Indian tantric literature, known as the Kala Chakra, or the Wheel of Time. Now the Golden Dakini picks up where the previous book ended. Yeshe Namla, the powerful and majestic Dakini, has entered our realm in human form in order to bring into the world the next Buddha, Maitreya. So we wanted to begin this session by inviting Charu to read from the Golden Dakini. This will be from an early part in the story, and here a band of protagonists who include the Golden Dakini herself, together with a group of divine princesses, Tibetan Buddhist monks, and even a miraculous wind horse. And they encounter the guardians of an extensive network of a secret underground lair and caves that lead to the high Himalayas. So Charu, why don't you begin with your reading?
Yeah. Tashi walked through the tunnel, humming a soft tune. The central tunnel ran straight, and the air was indeed sweet and fresh. In almost no time, they took a turn, and the tunnel opened out into a circular cavern, which was well lit by a bonfire blazing in the central pit. Tashi looked around the cavern with curiosity. The walls of the cave were covered with old tanghas and sweet-smelling herbs sprouted from cracks in the walls and the ground. The light of the bonfire revealed greenery everywhere. Tashi recognized several mountain herbs of the wild variety. Right next to the bonfire were two broad benches and a table made out of an old tree trunk. Tashi spotted the guardian sitting on the bench with a basket overflowing with herbs. He seemed busy at work, tending to a cauldron over the bonfire, and every so often seasoning the portions with herbs. The Sen deity was half Tashi's size. His entire form came up to Tashi's hips, but he was broad-chested, and his legs and arms bulged with muscle. His skin was a dark brown in color, the hue of dark coffee, and looked hard like the bark of a tree. The Sen, Tashi noticed, had 2 sets of arms, which were busy stirring the cauldron and throwing in herbs at the same time. As the rest of the party explored the cave, Tashi warmed his hands by the fireside. The Sen continued to work, apparently unperturbed by the interruption. Tashi eyed the Sen curiously as he stirred the cauldron. Then suddenly the Sen looked up to face Tashi with blazing silver eyes. In the blink of an eye, a huge hammer had appeared in one of the deity's hands, a vajra in the other, a bow in the third, and a dagger in the fourth. The guardian roared, "Who disturbs my peace?" Thank you.
So thank you for that. One of the things I love about your books and that I find most compelling are your evocations of different kinds of landscapes. So the high Himalayan forests of Sikkim and the visionary geography of Shambhala, these high altitude lakes, even the underground lairs, the caves and caverns that you just read from here. And I wonder, I know you've lived in many places in India, and so what was it that you found most compelling in the landscapes in which you've lived that you were able to draw upon for your writing?
Yeah. Well, I lived in Sikkim many years ago, and I would say some blessing passed to me. You know, I visited a lot of monasteries, I visited a lot of lamas, and I was just making a documentary on Mystic Sikkim. And what happened was that we got into talking about Shambhala, and I got fascinated with the whole concept of Shambhala. Now what happened was it triggered a search that, is there such a place? Could there be such a place? And this search led me to undergo a lot of Buddhist teachings. And all this I went through and then felt it was like a journey. And then I felt at the end of it that I need to write about this. And that I have experienced something and I need to talk about this in a little detail. Maybe I have just cited the tip of an iceberg. I won't say I am an expert or I have deep, in-depth knowledge or anything of that sort. But I experienced something, and that led me to write these books. And these books and its atmosphere comes out of Sikkim and the eastern Himalayas.
Sure, so what was it about Sikkim that inspired you the most?
It has a beautiful terrain, especially the north of Sikkim. And I could literally see this book, you know, because as I saw that terrain, it got me writing. And then the monasteries and the prayer flags, and I could sort of create this book with all that.
Yeah. So your works are this tremendous blend of fantasy and mythology from traditional Buddhist narratives, especially from the Kalachakra Tantra. So that's where this idea of Shambhala, the hidden kingdom, which is the special preserve of the Buddhist teachings, especially the teachings of the Wheel of Time. So what was your introduction to this idea of the hidden landscape of Shambhala?
You know, my introduction to this was again the number of Rinpoches and Lamas I met. And I got, as I said, a little fascinated with this whole concept of a legendary kingdom which is on earth and yet not. So there began a search for a geographical location, but there seemed to be none. Then some siddhas told me that you have to take up your vibrational level, and then maybe you will access Shambhala after doing a lot of yoga, Buddhist yogic practice. But so this led me to, you know, this book. Yeah.
Right, so in a way, your own personal search
Yeah.
for Shambhala that became the centerpiece of your book became a kind of personal journey. So the journey of your
Yes.
characters was reflecting your own journey
Yes.
and your own search.
Yes, it was. It was.
Yeah. So what relevance do you see an idea of a place like Shambhala, a place that's kind of removed from our ordinary time and place in the modern world?
Well, the relevance to the modern world is that Shambhala is a concept. It gives hope. It's a place of purity. It is as such a paradise. And for such a place to exist on earth, it would be nothing short of a miracle. So as in medieval times, I think it holds out this hope.
Yeah. Well, one of the great precursors of the kind of writing you've done, of course, is James Hilton's novel Lost Horizon. Maybe some of you in the audience have read that. It was published in 1933. It was produced as a wonderful film by Frank Capra in 1937, starring Ron Coleman. And that was the source of the idea of Shangri-La, which has become so deeply embedded in our own consciousness, even in the modern world. And while many stories, beginning with Hilton, has become deeply embodied in kind of colonialist attitudes of power and domination.
Yeah.
So in Shangri-La, you have the monastery in which the Lama himself is a European, he's a Christian missionary, and the Tibetans live in the valley below, farming the land to provide, sustenance for the Europeans living in the monastery. What's so wonderful about your works is that they draw upon similar themes of hidden landscapes and sacred geography, and yet they avoid that kind of positioning of power and domination.
Yeah, well, I think this book was way before my time. And I don't think I ever found a copy of this book. But I might have seen the film long ago. Yeah. So I think I kept my book as pretty different from this. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm reminded of Pico Iyer's opening comments to us about writing The Other, in which it's not necessarily an act of cultural appropriation, but a way of dreaming yourself into other lives, into other beings, other bodies, and other places.
Yeah.
So I see that kind of work in your own
Yeah,
writing.
mine is a bit of fantasy, a bit of mystery, a bit of mythology and legend all mixed together. And it is reflecting my own development, this book. And
Yeah. So what is it about the genre of fantasy that you find so compelling?
well, I love fantasy. I'm not such a fan of mythology, and considering that I've written it myself, it's quite strange. But I love especially Western fantasy, the epic fantasy and medieval fantasy. So I could be influenced by it, yeah. So my favorite books are The Lord of the Rings and Terry Goodkind's Shannara, yeah.
So in my own work about the great narratives of Tibet, especially the life of this great 11th century saint, the life of Milarepa, which became one of the primary liberation sacred narratives of the Himalayas, becomes a vehicle for reflecting on humanity, on what it means to be human. So I wonder if you see fantasy in your own work as a way of providing a kind of window in on what it means to be human.
Yeah, well, there was always the concept of purity and of truth, which influenced me above all. And I wanted to bring this feeling into my book. And I hope that I have managed to bring it. Only my readers can tell me whether I've managed it or not.
Yeah. So I know you've told me repeatedly in the past that you feel yourself as a novelist and not a scholar, that you haven't read a lot about the history of Shambhala from traditional sources, but you've spoken to many people about it. And yet, in reading your story, I see this interesting blend of traditional Tibetan and Buddhist narratives, but they're also deeply embedded in the epic Indian narratives in which you grew up. So I wonder, what sorts of stories did you grow up listening to that might have influenced your
well,
writing?
I wasn't thinking of the epics at all when I was writing this book. But I think we all hear the stories. We grew up with them. It's served with the milk and water as a child. And, well, the influence is always there.
Yeah, so when I read the story of the evil Prince Arden capturing Yeshe Namla, the Dakini, and kind of spiriting her away to the Asura realm, I mean, it just seems so close to these great stories from the Ramayana of Ravana, capturing Sita.
But I was never thinking of the Ramayana when I wrote this. Yeah. And I wanted to create some action in the sense of pure action. So I don't see, because there's no Ram in the book till the Maitreya is born. So I think it's pretty different what I've done, yeah.
So tell us where the story ends, and what's coming next.
Well, I'm working on something completely different right now. I've sort of finished my story with these two books, but I've left scope for a third book. I feel a book on the Maitreya makes sense, and I will do this book. Currently, I'm working on a book which is a saga set on the the far western frontier, which is Afghanistan and Pakistan and the northwest of India, Punjab. So I'm 13 chapters down in this. Well, I won't talk more about it. But after I finish this book, which shouldn't take too much time at all, a couple of months, maybe a year, then I will turn to the Maitreya. I always feel, I have felt that, chronicling the path of a Messiah or a Maitreya or somebody like that is an impossible task. But I will try to do this.
Yeah, and so what's the format? How do you tell the story of a Buddha?
Well, I have no planning for it, but it will happen.
You'll be moved by the spirit of Maitreya.
Yeah, I think I will have to do something before I do this.
Okay. So did you want to take a question or two? We have a few minutes.
Okay.
If you'd like.
Yeah.
So we have 2 minutes, maybe one or two very quick questions for Charu. Yes, on the side. And please, very short.
The Dakini comes from, as you know, from Shambhala by Chogyan Trungpa. In your book, have you been able to give us directions in moving towards the Great Eastern Rising, or is it just a fictional text of fantasy?
Can you repeat that, please?
So she was asking about a famous book by an early 1960s and 70s Tibetan Buddhist master who came to the United States in the West named Chogyan Trungpa, who reflected quite a bit on the meaning of the idea of Shambhala. So she's wondering if you had encountered that book and if that influenced your writing.
I have not encountered his book, but I have encountered his teachings through somebody else. So, yes, I'm aware of that. I have heard of his work and his teachings as well. Yeah.
And we should say, just it's quite interesting that traditionally Tibetans themselves were of two minds about the nature of Shambhala. On the one side, they said Shambhala is a purely mythical place. It's a visionary place. You can't travel in your own physical body, but you get there through deep states of meditation and contemplation. But on the other hand, there were those who actually wrote guidebooks on how to get there. Like you turn north from the Potala Palace in Lhasa, and when you come to the big tree, you turn east, and it's a place that you can actually encounter. You may have to purify yourself and be in the proper state of mind, but it is a physical place on earth. And there's a kind of tension between Shambhala as the actual, the geographic, and Shambhala as the visionary and kind of imaginary.
Yeah. You know, you might get directions to where Shambhala is, and my judgment of it would be you still would not reach it without higher levels of meditation. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think with that, we have to get to the most important part of this book launch, which is the ritual unveiling.
Yeah.
So I think we'll ask Charu to...
So our congratulations go to Charu Singh for the launch of the Golden Dakini, and thank you also to Andrew Quintman. Charu will be signing the new book in the book signing area. It's in the far left corner of the front lawn, so please go and see Charu there. She'll be there momentarily. And please bear with us, we're going to do a quick turnaround for the next session, which involves a very swift sound check. So is Milk and Honey with Rupi Kaur, introduced by Snigdha Poonam. So we'll go into that session in about 5 minutes with a quick sound check in between.